My name is Hubert Knoblauch. I'm Professor of General Sociology at the Technical University of Berlin. My research interests are mainly communication, knowledge, sociology of religion, and some minor areas, something like the sociology of death or sociological thanatologies among those. When I was studying in the 70s and especially in the 80s, there was still the common idea that death is a taboo in society, and one does not talk about death, and death is hidden in society. But it seemed to me that, especially already in the 80s, that things have changed. Moody's book has appeared in Germany in the mid-70s, and also the public opinion has been changing. So I felt that one has to turn to death and make death a topic. I have to admit that I've been a coward. So I first started with near-death experience because this was kind of easy, accessible to me. It was a kind of method because we've been doing qualitative research. So I started studying first by qualitative interviews of near-death experience, but I continued and doing research on dissections after that and on organ donation, with also the goal that death should also become more of a topic in the social sciences as in the science general. First, we started with a kind of theory of communication approach because given the findings of Moody's and others up to Grace, and we assumed that this kind of commonality of experience and of experiential motives is linked to a narrative, as we've lived to see it now, to form of a narrative, and inferred that it must be something like a genre, which has to be used in order to communicate this kind of experience, to mark them as specific and so on. And so I started some interviews, first using the snowball system in the southern of Germany, which is a very Catholic region. And in this region, the surprise to me was very much so, in Germany and Switzerland, I have to say, that the majority actually of the interviews I led with various people, old, young, female, male, and so on, differed quite significantly from the assumption of a common genre and of shared motives. And this, of course, drove us to continue this research and try to test it in a way. And by accident, we got access to research project money, and so we could conduct a representative research, a quantitative research, somehow to test this whole thing. We found experiences who had very traditional conceptions, traditional motives, which didn't turn up somewhere else. You could imagine like medieval experiences. Of course, we also had some rather new agey ones, but we had also different ones which were corroborated by the later research, as we had access to people from East Germany who haven't been socialized with a religious background, who had quite diverse kind of experience. So the motives have been quite different, but from a sociology of religion point of view, it was also, of course, very interesting that it's kind of experiences of what we call big or great transcendencies, the other world, the real experience, some are very, very close to death, that these kind of experiences wouldn't be interpreted in a classical religious way. To the contrary, most of the interpretations, the vast majority of interpretations, at least of the experiences in Germany, in West Germany, one has to say, led people to go outside, to look for interpretations outside of the church, be they rather new agey, be they humanist, be they whatever. No, there is actually various ones, and I have to say that, especially of the qualitative interviews, because with data and numbers you don't get a lot of really impressive stories. But with the interviews I led with the people in person have been really impressive, and surprisingly most of them had been characterized by certain humor. A good sense, I would say. And one of the stories was that a woman who was really close, or biologically, medically close to death, she had a kind of a dinner party scenario. We call this type as a scenario because there was not a real development, but she was in a kind of dinner party, standing around, talking with people, and then someone who looked like death skeleton-like, was the kind of description, approached her and asked her to come with her and leave the party. And so she went with him. He took her by her arm and went to the door, opened the door, and went outside. And as he went outside, she pushed him outside and closed the door and said, "Oh, I decided I want to stay here a little bit longer." And she said, then the story was over. And the interesting thing about her, she had 3 critical incidents, and she told me that she had 3 times the same kind of experience, which is a bit of humorous, but it's also, she left out laughing, but a very impressive one. There are certainly meaningful experiences, and whatever they may refer to, that's a different question I would like to address a bit later, is of course, as all our life is made up of experiences, more or less of different kinds of experiences. They are part of the life and add to the meaningful order of our life, which is not a one-dimensional order of meaning, but which has various strata, dreams, fantasies, imaginations, and so on, which are all part of our experiential order. And the near-death experience is probably a certain form, and that's one of the general questions, if it's a specific form, a universal form, or something like that, then it would have a significance. But this is to be tested. So far, it's a significant form, and one of the theses, I'm not sure if one can really prove it, is that it's a kind of a fixed province of meaning. I'm not so sure, because the motives change, and it's a syndrome of various motives. OBEs can be had without any near-death experience. So I'm not really sure if this is the case. So sociologically, it's of course a cultural phenomenon, first of all. But if there is some proof of a universality, a generality across certain kinds of people in certain situations, then it could be taken as signifying something, but what it signifies is a question of an explanation. So you need to have a good explanation for that, of course, be it physiological, and one of the other explanations, there's no physiological explanation. Of course, there's a good reason for that. By the way, most of our thinking does not have a physiological explanation anyhow, so this is not a real surprise. That is how our thinking works. It's not determined, as far as we know, by brain activities. It's actually the other way around mostly. And the same is the case for near-death experience. Our task is only to understand the people, not to understand what they understand to be the reality. I mean, if you say, what do these experiences, we must come back, there's a huge variety of experience. Some of these experiences are not even clear about death. So the reference to death is one of the reference and the signification of that, but that's a meaning reference, first of all, and it's a meaning reference to the actors. If there would be universal, it would be, of course, a reference at least to what death or how becoming dead can be experienced. But as I said, I'm not so sure if this kind of universalist interpretation can be really proven, and it doesn't seem as if research goes in this direction at all, if there is such a research which would allow us to make this kind of conclusion. And so the very fact that we have an increasing number, we have categories like near-death experience, by the way, not that long, the very categories for that, does us tell much more how we handle death and how people expect the time of death to be without thinking reflectively about it, but using the kind of imagination which is built in our head, mostly, by the way, of course, in patterns of given from others and from society and from our culture, but not exclusively so. One interesting indication to that, no one asked me this so far, is that when you compare East and Western Germany, we found differences in Eastern Germany, and of course much less religious motives, kind of hellish motives. The interesting thing has been that although very few people in Eastern Germany knew that they are near-death experience, we had the same percentage of experience in the East as in the West to be explained.